Good morning.
Good morning.
I am the Reverend Olympia Brown. You know about me perhaps from your church history, and you'll hear a little bit more about that shortly. But for now, I have opening words as well. These are from Day Unto Day, daily readings, published by the American Unitarian Association in 1873 for July 24th. And when the word of guidance comes, let it be heeded as well as heard. Let it be yielded to without hesitancy and without fear. It is the word of your own highest convictions. It is the word of faith. It will fill you with strength. It will work out for you salvation. And our chalice lighting, more modern. This is by Samuel A. Trumbore. O light of life, be kindled again in our hearts. As we meet together this morning, be kindled again in our hearts to celebrate in the joy of human community, seeking a wholeness that extends beyond ourselves, and might I add, beyond our moment in time. Once again, I am honored to be your guest today from long in the past. I will be talking a great deal about women and their condition. That doesn't mean I forget the noble men who are with us. I would like to begin with a prayer, is what I would call it. You may feel like meditating or simply reflecting in silence. Spirit of life, love, and light, whom some of us call God, we are all your children. We are all sacred. We talk of reforms. We have hoped to make the world safe for democracy, to establish peace. But the very first necessity in reform work is the recognition of divine capabilities in people. The foundation of democracy is the realization that every human being is a child of God, entitled to the opportunities of life, worthy of respect, and requiring an atmosphere of justice and liberty for his development. And being the faithful, let us reflect on this. If we would have justice, we must be just. If we would have peace, we must create peace. If we would have love, we must be the very act of love.
This is a quote from the Reverend Olympia Brown. How absurd to talk of unsexing women by education. It is because she possesses intellectual faculties, because she has reason and reflection, God-given, that it is her duty to cultivate these powers. If a woman has a natural predilection for science or art, for metaphysics or mathematics, it is as if a voice from heaven and called her to be doing the work.
The poets represent woman as an angel. Philosophers describe her as a fool, and the usages of common life make her a drudge. How shall we resolve these three contradictory views into one true picture? In 1860, I began a long, rambling manuscript with those lines. At the tender age of 25, then I had already traveled a long road toward understanding female character, the title of my essay. Ever since I was a schoolgirl, I had struggled with the way women were represented. In my time, Susan B. Anthony taught school and discovered that male teachers at her school earned $10 a week, to her $2.50. In my time, Elizabeth Blackwell had to study privately with friends who were doctors before being admitted to a medical college by a vote of the student body, possibly a practical joke, and becoming the first female medical doctor in 1849. In my time, science was closed to women. Maria Mitchell, another of us, studied with her father, an amateur astronomer, and discovered a comet in 1847. Perhaps because of that celestial accident, she became the only female in the American Association for the Advancement of Science in 1850. I lived to see women earn some rights, but I know there is still work to be done. A mysterious time and relative dimension in space enabled me to answer a call from your time and your church 90 years after I departed this life. Someone told me this form of transport looked like a telephone call box. What is a telephone call box? In your time, women still earn only 3/4 of what men do. Your governments and businesses still have a small percentage of women leaders. There has never been a woman elected president or vice president of this country, and men in the headlines of your newspapers still speak of women as objects, as things. Long ago I wrote that woman is the ornament of society, but as the ornament she is deprived of that discipline by which her powers are to be strengthened and increased. Most troubling to me as a suffragist is that one of your political conventions last week featured a speaker who wrote in 2009, 7 years ago, that the trend has been going the wrong way in America. Where did he put the blame? On the vast increase in welfare beneficiaries and the extension of the franchise to women. When I heard that, I found a time travel machine in a hurry. So this is a Universalist church in 2016. I mean a Unitarian Universalist church. I'm a Universalist, but throughout my life I formed alliances with and was inspired by Unitarians, so how could I not approve of this partnership? My callings were to Universalist ministry and to women's suffrage. Both of those vocations were dear to my heart, but some people think I was a suffragist who just happened to be a Universalist. It's very interesting to read about oneself in history books. Sometimes it makes me proud and happy. They get it right. And sometimes it makes me cringe. They get it right. Dana Green, who collected my writings in 1983 under the title Suffrage and Religious Principle, says universalism was not incidental to her life. It was central and all-pervasive. This religious tradition provided Brown the principles from which she interpreted her world and the goals toward which she marshaled her considerable energies and talents. It gave her a sense of self-worth, designated a life work for her, sustained her through bitter and trying times, and helped her understand the meaning of American history. They are kind words, and they are true. The religion of my heart and soul underpinned both of my passions. I worshiped actively with my entire being. Unlike those who worked and worried to save themselves from eternal torture, I knew my divinity was love. With universal salvation ensured, my expression of religious focus could focus on service to humanity in the here and now. The world needed, and still needs, able-bodied women free from their childhood to run, work, and play, and knowledgeable in some business or art that will render them independent. It did not and does not need ethereal winged beings floating on clouds and plucking harps. I really don't have anything against angels, but the image of angels frittering away eternity while people were bought and sold. Hungry children worked 10 hours a day, and war shattered lives. That just got under my skin. But you hardly know me. I should introduce myself. As you heard me tell the children, and they are smart children, they remind me of my own Henry and Gwen. I was born on the prairie. My parents journeyed to Michigan when the acreage on the family farm in Vermont was insufficient for their dreams. My mother shared the farm work equally with my father, and she instilled in me that women and men are equals. Could there be a better place for a little girl to grow up than under the wide blue sky, surrounded by the smell of flowers and new-cut hay? Than a countryside with farms and swamps and meadows to explore, with acres and acres to roam and run in? There may be, but I do not know of it. At first, we had no school, and we didn't go to church. There was no Universalist church, even in the nearest village called Schoolcraft, Michigan. My mother taught me, as I've said, reading, writing, sums, and Universalist principles. There was the Underground Railroad station in town, which my aunt and uncle were conductors on. They helped nearly 1,500 former slaves escape to Canada. I observed that my mother's and aunt's religion didn't stop with readings in a book. It was a living, doing faith. Eventually, my father and the neighbors built a school on our farmland, but it wasn't enough. I wanted education the way our corn wanted sunshine. We went on, my sisters and brother and I, to the village school, boarding there during the week and traveling home on weekends. I was eager to savor even more of learning. Public speaking, recitation, and debate were cornerstones of education there and then. Write essays and recite them to the class? Yes. Study issues and debate them with my schoolmates? Yes. Then I got that stunning news. Only boys could give their own speeches, and only boys could debate. I felt so strongly that I persuaded my cousin Addison to take a debate position, that girls should be allowed to write and give speeches. And he did. After he announced his proposal, silence fell. Then the teachers all rose. "We will leave the class if the students persist in such a resolution," one said. In the end, they didn't punish him, only because they didn't take him seriously. After I finished school in the village, I believe my father would have been happy to have me end my education and become a wife either to some man or to our own farm. But I was not content to do so. With my mother's help, I persuaded him to let me and my next older sister go to the Mount Holyoke Female Seminary in Massachusetts. I was thrilled. Here I was, getting ready to attend one of the few institutions where women could experience higher learning, but my hopes were soon dashed once again. It was not the free pursuit of knowledge I had imagined. Instead, Mount Holyoke dogged me with rules from morning until night. There were rules to eat by and rules to sleep by, rules to breathe and rules to pray by. There were inquisitions in which students were encouraged to stand up and confess their small transgressions. I whispered during quiet hour, "I did not darn my socks." Worst of all were those strictures about praying and religion. We were encouraged in only one religious expression, to worship an angry, vindictive God. No kind parent this. He would consign many of his children to eternal hellfire. Later I wrote, "Most young ladies, before they graduate from such institutions, get what is vulgarly called religion, but which in its practical workings is most unlike the religion of Jesus." I discovered a more promising education in Yellow Springs, Ohio, and the next year, in 1856, I enrolled at Antioch College. This was a coeducational school with Horace Mann, the great champion of publicly funded, non-sectarian schooling, at its head. I admired this man, who eventually, 2 months before his own death, challenged a graduating class, "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity." One Christmas vacation, I was invited to visit a friend in Cleveland, Ohio. Her mother showed me a property rights petition asking the state legislature to give married women the right to control their inherited property, to control their own earnings, should they have any, and the guardianship of their children. She asked if I wanted to take the petition around the neighborhood. Delighted, I went out early the next morning and got 89 signatures, and that was only a start. My friend had to beg me to take a break from collecting signatures on New Year's Day so we could spend that holiday together. I thrived on Antioch's liberal educational atmosphere, not only in its classrooms, but also in its lecture halls, where I heard the likes of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Edward Everett Hale. But even there, all the speakers invited were male. I got together with a group of friends who supported me in inviting Antoinette Brown Blackwell. She was no relation to me, but incidentally, she was the sister-in-law of the Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, the first female medical doctor. I invited her to Yellow Springs to speak to us. This Reverend Brown had been denied ordination after completing her degree in ministry, but she was later ordained by her congregational church, individual church. She became a Unitarian in later life. Reverend Brown came to Yellow Springs. It was the first time I had heard a woman preach, and the sense of the victory lifted me up. A suffragette and abolitionist, Reverend Brown reinforced my desire to become a minister. When I graduated in 1860, I went on to St. Lawrence University Theological School. A civil war was looming, and students' essays lamented that slaves had no rights. I observed that enslaved females had even fewer rights and protections than the males. I graduated in June 1863, and that same month was ordained a minister historically by the Northern Universalist Association. The next several years were filled with preaching in churches in Vermont and New England, and then with marriage and raising a family, while I continued to minister to my congregations. I married John Henry Willis in 1873, and he supported that ministry and supported my using my maiden name. But it was women's rights and responsibilities that remained foremost in my thoughts. Society encouraged my female sisters to be frivolous instead of industrious, to be absorbed in dress, gossip, and to pamper their pets, shirking their responsibilities toward humanity. Becoming working women rather than impotent angels was our spiritual imperative. I wrote, "Woman will not be estimated by the moral elevation of her husband or her father. The question to be put to her will be, what is the condition of your own soul? How much have you in your character that is godlike? How has your spirit gained in strength, in truth, in purity, by the discipline of your life?" But, says some objector, women will not be angels when they're brought into contact with the rude world. Alas, the United States of America in 1874 is not a favorable place for angels. Nor are the men of the 19th century suitable companions for them. I dare say it may be the same even in 2016. Despite the other business of my life, I never put aside the cause of women's suffrage. Early in my ministry, I took leave from my congregation to go to the new state of Kansas to advocate for suffrage. In the scorching summer of 1867, I traveled by wagon on dusty ruts and shared corn shuck stuffed mattresses with Kansans who opened their humble doors to me. 50 years later, the journey still wasn't over. The Great War was being fought to make the world safe for democracy, and I did not think that women in what President Woodrow Wilson called the greatest democracy on earth should be left out. As the war raged, I joined suffragettes who picketed daily in front of the White House, sometimes chaining themselves to that fence. Under a sleeting sky, I saw women knocked to the pavement, banners torn out of their hands while police stood by. I saw those women also wrestled into police wagons. Imprisoned, our heroines went on a hunger strike, and to end it, their jailers fed them by physical force. One icy day in Lafayette Square, I stepped up to a blazing fire and thrust into it a sheaf of President Wilson's speeches, symbolically burning them to ash. And at last he paid attention. At long last, in September of 1918, Wilson did advocate for women's suffrage before Congress, but it was another 2 years before Congress passed the measure and it was ratified by enough states to become the 19th Amendment to the Constitution on August 18, 1920. And days later, on September 12th, I gave the sermon at Universalist Church in Racine, Wisconsin. Looking back on the 30-odd years since I had resigned my pastorate there to join full-time the struggle for women's suffrage, I said, the grandest thing has been the lifting up of the gates and the opening of the doors to the women of America, giving liberty to 27 million women, thus opening to them a new and larger life and a higher ideal. The future opens before them, fraught with great possibilities of noble achievement. And men too, I might add. It is worth a lifetime to behold this victory. Immobilized, as if cut into marble angels, women were powerless to heal the great wounds in society, but as living, breathing, sweating, laboring women, they could support their families, educate their children, reach out to the poor, and vote for change in society. With suffrage won, but still in the shadow of the Great War, I turned to the cause that would fuel the remaining years of my life, ending militarism. For this struggle, too, I called on the reserves of faith that had sustained me, and I ended the Racine anniversary sermon with this. We can never make the world safe for democracy by fighting. Rather, by showing the power of justice done to each humble individual, shall we be able to create a firm basis for the state. Every nation must learn that the people of all the nations are children of God and must all share the wealth of the world. You may say this is impracticable, far away, and can never be accomplished. But this is the work which Universalists are called upon to do. We are not alone. There is always an unseen power working for righteousness. The infinite is behind us. Dear friends, there is nothing in all the world so important to you as to be loyal to this faith which has placed before you the loftiest ideals, which has comforted you in sorrow, strengthened you for noble duty, and made the world beautiful for you. These friends to whom I spoke were flesh and blood, not heavenly hosts. Almost 50 years earlier, I had posited that an angel in American society at the present time would be sadly out of place and very uncomfortable. But then and now, it isn't angels that we need. We need women and men, and here they are, getting their feet wet, rolling up their sleeves, wearing out their shoe leather, raising their voices in gentle, angry song, getting their hands dirty, getting their second wind, and marching forward in the conviction that we can shape a better world. May it be so. Our closing words are from 1 James, as would have been appropriate in my time. Be doers of the word and not merely hearers. Those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers who forget, but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing.